Hey, I'm Nathan. Before we start, I want you to think about something strange. Every one of us carries proof of who we are. A diploma in a drawer, a photo on a phone, a name on a paycheck. We assume that if anyone ever doubted us, we could reach into a folder and pull the truth out and hold it up. Now imagine a man whose proof was locked in a government vault by people who told him it was his duty to let them lock it. Imagine that man getting older in a country that quietly decided he was lying. Today's story is about what happens when a woman spends 5 years telling a courtroom that her husband's whole life is a fantasy, and a courtroom believes her, because the file that would have destroyed her had a stamp on it that said, restricted. It's about a $60 sale in a thrift store on a Tuesday afternoon. It's about a stranger behind a register who happened to know exactly what he was holding, and it's about the difference between a man who is broken and a man who has simply been waiting, very patiently, for the right person to walk into the room. Stick around till the end, because the last 20 minutes of this one are not about revenge the way you're expecting revenge. They're about something colder, and honestly, something much better. The letter that ended Marvin Ketchum's life arrived in a courtroom in Selkirk Bend, Ohio, on the 14th of October, which happened to be his 64th birthday. He had not told anyone it was his birthday. There was no reason to. He sat at the respondent's table in a gray suit he had bought for his father's funeral in 1994, and he kept his hands flat on the table because a man's hands are the first thing that betrays him, and he had learned that a long time ago in a place he was not allowed to name. Across the aisle, his wife of 31 years sat with her legs crossed at the ankle and her chin lifted at an angle that had taken her decades to perfect. Millicent Ketchum, Millie to the women at the club, Mrs. Ketchum to the girl who did her nails, and, for the last 406 days, the petitioner to the state of Ohio. She wore pearls that Marvin had not paid for. She had a small, patient smile on her face, the kind you give a dog that has finally stopped barking. Her attorney was her cousin. That was the first thing that had told Marvin the game was rigged, though at the time he had only thought it was tacky. Quimby Litchfield was 51, soft in the middle, with a voice like a man reading a menu out loud to impress a date. He rose, buttoned his jacket, and said the sentence that would follow Marvin Ketchum for the next 5 years. Your Honor, we've submitted Respondent's Exhibit 14. It's the response from the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. It's dated August the 2nd. It reads, and I'm quoting it exactly, "No record found for the individual named." Marvin heard his own pulse in his ears. Not fear, something older than fear. The sound a man hears when an engine that has been running his whole life makes a noise it has never made before. Mr. Ketchum has told this court, Litchfield continued, and has told his wife and his daughter, and apparently a number of people in Selkirk Bend over the years, that he served as an Air Force pilot, that he flew what he calls special missions, that he was decorated. Your Honor, there is no record, not of a commission, not of flight training, not of a discharge. There is nothing. This man was never in the United States Air Force. Marvin's attorney at the time was a court appointee named Kirby, who had also handled 2 evictions and a dog bite case that same morning. Kirby said, "Objection, relevance," in the tone of a man ordering coffee. "It goes directly to competency and to credibility," Litchfield said, and turned toward the bench with a little flourish. Which brings me to Exhibit 15. Exhibit 15 was 11 pages long, on cream letterhead, and it was signed by a geriatric psychiatrist named Dr. Norman Culpepper. Marvin had sat with the man for 90 minutes in a beige office above a bank. Culpepper had asked him to draw a clock. He had asked him to remember 3 words. He had asked him, in a warm voice, to describe his military service. And Marvin, because he had spent 47 years being careful, and because he was tired, and because a doctor's office had felt like a safe room, had told him a little. Not everything. A little. An island. A cargo aircraft. 40 men in the back. A landing. Culpepper's report used the word confabulation 9 times. It used the phrase, a fixed and elaborate false autobiographical narrative, twice. It concluded that Marvin Ketchum presented with significant impairment in judgment regarding financial and personal affairs, and recommended, in its final paragraph, that a responsible family member be granted decision-making authority. The responsible family member was sitting across the aisle in pearls. Judge Gloria Satterfield read for 4 minutes. Marvin watched a fly walk the length of the windowsill. When she finally spoke, she did not look at him. "Mr. Ketchum, do you understand what's happening here today?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you have documentation of the service you've described?" "No, ma'am." "Any documentation at all?" "No, ma'am." "Why not?" And here was the moment. Marvin Ketchum had thought about this moment for a long time, in the way a man thinks about a fire in his house. He had rehearsed it in the truck. He knew that if he said the true thing, out loud, in a room with a court reporter in it, he would be saying a thing he had signed a paper promising never to say. He had been 22 years old when he signed it. A man in a gray suit had slid it across a folding table in a hangar in the Philippines and said, "Lieutenant, you did a hell of a thing tonight, and now you're going to do a harder one. You're going to go home and be nobody." He had been nobody for 47 years. He had been so good at it that his own wife had built a case out of it. "Because I was told not to," Marvin said. The courtroom made a sound. It was not a laugh, exactly. It was the noise 30 people make when they all decide the same thing at once. Judge Satterfield granted the divorce, awarded the marital home in full, awarded the retirement account in full, awarded the 1988 Chevrolet, and, based on the Culpeper report, appointed Millicent Ketchum as limited conservator over the person and estate of Marvin Ketchum, subject to review in 12 months. His pension, all $491 of it, would from that day forward be deposited into an account she controlled. In the stairwell outside, because the elevator was full and Marvin had always taken stairs, she caught up with him. Her heels made a sound like a clock speeding up. She was not angry. That was the thing he would think about for 5 years. She was pleased, in a relaxed and finished way, like a woman leaving a good restaurant. "Marvin." He stopped on the landing. Below them, someone was arguing about a parking validation. "I want you to know I looked for it," Millie said. "The record. I really did look. 31 years I let you have that story. You'd get 2 drinks in you at Rogers, and you'd get that look, and I'd think, all right, let him have it. Everybody needs something." She adjusted her purse strap. "And then I looked, and there was nothing there. And do you know what I felt? Relief. Because for 31 years I thought I'd married a man who was hiding something from me. Turns out, I married a man who had nothing to hide, just nothing at all. Millie, don't call the house. Don't call Kristen, she doesn't want it either." She started down the stairs past him, and then she stopped 2 steps below, which put her eyes level with his, and she said it in a light and almost affectionate voice, the way you'd tell someone to drive safe. "Go die in a gutter where you belong." Then she went down the stairs and out through the glass doors into the October afternoon, and a man in a charcoal overcoat opened the passenger door of a black Lincoln for her, and that man was not her cousin. And Marvin, standing at the window on the landing, understood at least one thing that day. He just did not yet understand how much it was worth. 5 years is a long time to be nobody twice. Marvin Ketchum's room was above the Ellis Laundromat on 3rd Street, up an outside staircase that iced over in December. It was 14 by 18 feet. He had a bed, a hot plate, a card table, a chair he had re-webbed himself, and a footlocker. In the winter, the dryers ran underneath him until 9 at night, and the floor stayed warm, and he had told himself more than once that a man who complains about a warm floor has forgotten how cold the world can get. He worked 4 days a week at Westbrook Marine Canvas, cutting and stitching boat covers, seat cushions, and the occasional awning. Roger Westbrook had hired him at 65 because Marvin had walked in, looked at a compound curve on a bow cover that 3 men had botched, and said, "Your problem's the seam allowance on the panel that isn't there yet." Roger had paid him under the table for 2 months, then over it, and had never once asked why a man that age needed the work. The other men at the shop called him Ketch. They liked him. He was quiet, he was early, he fixed the sewing machines without being asked, and when the young guys tried to needle him about being 100 years old, he took it with a flat little smile and beat them at everything with his hands. Nobody at that shop knew that $491 a month of his money went into a bank account he could not touch. Nobody knew that twice a year he had to sit in a small room and account for his own life to a woman who had once picked out his ties. That was the part nobody understood about a conservatorship. People heard the word and thought it meant somebody helps you with the bills. It did not mean that. It meant that on paper, legally, Marvin Ketchum had the standing of a large child. He could not sign a lease over a year. He could not open a line of credit. He could not sell property. He could not. And this was the one that had taken a year to fully land on him. Hire an attorney to challenge the arrangement without the court's permission. And the court took its cues from the annual report filed by the conservator. And the conservator was Millicent. The reviews were held in a small room on the second floor of the county building. And Millie came to everyone, and she was always kind in them. That was her craft. She would say things like, "He's doing so much better," and "He hasn't mentioned the airplane thing in almost a year," which I think is real progress. And the referee would write a note, and everyone would go home. And every year, in the 14 days after the review, she would take a little more. Year 2, it was the 96 acres outside Bellbrook that had belonged to Marvin's father, sold, she reported, to fund the ward's ongoing care needs. Year 3, it was the pair of Corey and Sons shotguns, appraised, she reported, at $800 for the pair, which was roughly 1/9 of what they were worth. Year 4, it was the last of it. There was no year 5, because by year 5, there was nothing left in the estate but $491 a month and a man in a room above a laundromat. Kristen had come once. Marvin's daughter was 34, a paramedic on the Selkirk Bend squad, tall like him, with her mother's hands and her mother's talent for being certain. She had stood at the bottom of the outside staircase in her uniform pants and a hoodie because she would not come up, and she had said, "Mom showed me the report, Dad. The one from the doctor. I read the whole thing." "I know she did. Do you know what it says?" "I know what it says." "Then just tell me it's not true." "Say, Kristen, it's not true. I was never in the Air Force. I made it up, and it doesn't matter, and I'll come up those stairs right now." He had wanted to. God, he had wanted to. He had stood at the top of that staircase and looked at his daughter and felt every single one of the 40 men he had put on the ground, alive, on the 12th of April, 1979, standing behind him like a wall, and he could not make himself say a word against them. "I can't do that," he said. She had nodded, once, the way you nod at a diagnosis, and she had gotten in her car. That was 3 years ago. He wrote her a letter every month. He never mailed them. They were in the footlocker, in a shoebox, rubber-banded in bundles of 12, because he had decided that if he was going to be a lunatic, he might as well be an organized one. Also in the footlocker, folded with the sleeves in, wrapped in a pillowcase because he did not own tissue paper, was a jacket. It was a sage green nylon flight jacket, an MA1, with a knit collar gone gray at the fold and an orange lining that had faded to the color of weak tea. It had a burn on the left cuff the size of a thumbnail. It had no unit patch on the shoulder, because there had never been one. It had a name tag on the chest, and the name tag said nothing but a first initial and a last name in block letters, because that had been the rule. And sewn inside the collar, hidden under the knit band where you had to fold it back to see, was a small rectangle of leather about 2 inches by 3. Marvin's flight engineer had made it for him in a hangar in the Philippines on a night when nobody had slept, using a leather punch, a Marks-a-Lot, and half a can of beer for courage. It had 4 things stamped on it: a tail number, 660219, a call sign, Tallow 6, a date, 12 APR 79, and under those, in Eugene Kavanaugh's blocky, careful hand, 40 souls, you brought them home. Marvin had not put the jacket on in 20 years, but every few months, usually late, usually when the dryers had gone quiet and the room was too still, he would take it out and hold it and put his thumb on that little patch of leather the way another man might touch a rosary, and he would say, in his head, not out loud, "All right, Howard. All right," and then he would put it away. Then in March, the letter came from Bellwether. The trouble started, as it usually does, with a number on a page. Marvin's blood pressure medication had been $32 a month for 6 years. In March it went to $111 because the manufacturer discount card expired, and the pharmacy tech, who was 19 and doing her best, could not make the computer take the new one without a doctor's note, and the doctor's office had a 3-week wait, and Marvin's $491 a month did not go to Marvin. It went into an account he had to request from. He filed the request. He filed it on the form, in his careful draftsman's printing, and he mailed it to the address on the annual notice, and 11 days later he got back a single sheet of paper with a letterhead he did not recognize. Bellwether Legacy Group, it said. Dignity. Continuity. Care. The letter said that his request for a disbursement had been received and reviewed by the office of the conservator, and that it had been determined that the ward's ongoing needs would be better served in a supported living environment, and that a bed had been reserved for him at Bellwether Meadows, in Marion, effective the 1st of May, and that upon admission all pension and benefit income would be assigned directly to the facility, and that his signature was required on the enclosed form, and that if the ward declined, the conservator was prepared to petition the court for an order. Bellwether Meadows was 130 miles away. Marvin Ketchum, who could still thread a size 20 needle without glasses on a good morning, who could still hear a bearing going bad in a walking foot machine 3 benches away, who worked 4 days a week and paid his own rent, was being moved into a locked wing in another county so that $491 a month could be signed over to a company. He sat at the card table with the letter for a long time. Then he went to the county law library, which was one room with 3 computers and a woman named Francine who was kind to him, and he spent 11 Saturdays learning what a limited conservatorship actually was, and he learned that he had the right to petition for restoration of rights, and that to do it he needed an independent evaluation, and that an independent geriatric capacity evaluation in the state of Ohio cost, at the cheapest place he could find, $1,200. He had, in a coffee can in the footlocker, $640. He picked up 2 Saturdays at the shop. He sold the re-webbed chair. He sold his father's level, the good one, the 24-inch Stanley with the brass ends. He got to $910 by the end of April, and then the truck's water pump went, and he was back to $460, and the hearing on the Bellwether petition was set for the 19th of June. On the 2nd Tuesday of May, Marvin Ketchum opened his footlocker, took out a pillowcase, and unwrapped a jacket. He did the math out loud in the empty room, which he never did. $60, he said. $60 is a tank of gas, and it's most of a week. Then he folded it over his arm, and he went down the outside staircase, and he walked 6 blocks in the rain to a store on the corner of 3rd and Vine, with a hand-painted sign that said, Second Wind Thrift. Clothes, tools, odds, honest prices. The man behind the register was about 50, heavy through the shoulders, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and forearms, like a man who had spent his 20s turning wrenches. There was a coffee mug by the register that said 51st AMU, and a laminated card taped to the counter that listed, in Sharpie, what the store would and would not buy. Afternoon, the man said. Del Ingersoll, wet out there. It is. What have you got? Marvin laid the jacket on the counter, and he did the thing you do when you are about to sell something you should not be selling, which is talk fast and look at the wall. MA1. It's old. Liners faded. There's a burn on the cuff. Knits shot at the collar. I know it's not worth much. Give me 60 and it's yours. Del Ingersoll did not answer. He picked the jacket up the way you pick up something that might be an animal. He turned it over. He looked at the shoulder where a patch should have been and was not. He looked at the name tag, which said nothing but K. Ketchum. He held the left cuff up to the light and looked at the burn, and his thumb moved over it once. Then he turned the collar back to check the knit, the way anyone would, and he stopped. The rain was loud on the awning outside. Somewhere in the back of the store, a radio was playing something with a steel guitar in it. Del Ingersoll stood there with the collar folded back in his 2 hands, and he read the little rectangle of stamped leather, and then he read it again, and Marvin watched the color go out of the man's face from the jaw upward like water leaving a sink. Del reached behind himself without looking, found a stool, and sat down on it very hard. Sir, he said, it's fine. 50. 50's fine. Sir. Del's voice had gone strange. He was still holding the collar open. He did not look up. This tail number. It's just a jacket. 66-0219. Del looked up now, and his eyes were wet and furious in a way Marvin did not understand at all. My uncle flew search for this aircraft. 2 weeks. 14 days. Out of Clark. Box patterns over open water. Until they made them stop. He's 81 years old, and he has a chart of that search box in his room. Right now, sir. Framed. On the wall. Marvin Ketchum's hands, which had been steady in a cockpit with no hydraulics and a dead man in the left seat, began to shake. They told us it went in the water, Dell said. That's the story. 40-some souls went in the water. No beacon, no debris. That's what everybody was told. And then years later, in the shop, you'd hear the other thing. The thing guys would only say after a couple beers. That it didn't go in the water. That somebody put it down. No hydraulics, no runway, and one pilot walked away from it and was gone before anybody got his name. He stood up off the stool. He reached over and turned the deadbolt on the front door of his own store and flipped the cardboard sign to closed at 2:40 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Sit down, Del Ingersoll said. Please, sit down. Marvin did not sit down. He said, how much can you give me for it? Because that was the only sentence he had left. Del picked up the phone by the register. His hand was not steady either. He dialed a number he apparently knew by heart, and while it rang, he looked at Marvin Ketchum the way you look at a photograph of somebody you were told had died. Sir, he said, the Air Force has been looking for you since 1979. He swallowed. And sir, the 40 men on that airplane, they never stopped searching for you. Delbert Ingersoll had spent 11 years as an Air Force crew chief on C-130s, 6 of them at Dias, and he had gotten out at 30 because his knees were shot and his wife wasn't. He had opened Second Wind with an $11,000 loan and a rule he had written on an index card and taped inside the register drawer where customers could not see it. Nothing with a name on it gets sold till you know the name. He had bought a lot of jackets in 19 years. He had bought Vietnam-era A2s off the sons of men who had not understood what they had. He had bought a silver star out of a shoebox of costume jewelry for $4, and he had spent 7 months finding the family, and he had driven it to Wheeling himself and handed it to a woman on a porch and driven home without stopping for lunch. But he had never had a ghost walk into the store. He made Marvin sit in the folding chair by the fitting room curtain, and he brought him coffee in a mug that said Port Clinton Walleye Festival, and he did not ask a single question for 11 minutes, which was, Marvin would later say, the most decent thing anyone had done for him in 5 years. Then Del said, my uncle's name is Homer. Homer Ingersoll. He was a loadmaster, and in April of '79 he was flying search out of Clark on a C-130 they'd stripped for it. He'll tell you the whole thing if you let him. He tells everybody. Nurses, the mailman, the guy who fixes the ice machine. 81 years old, and it's the only story he's got left that he cares about. Where is he? Del's mouth did something complicated. Bellwether Meadows. Marion. Marvin set the mug down on the floor. Say that again. Bellwether Meadows. Out in Marion County. It's a... Del made a gesture. It's a place. It's not the worst one. It's not a good one either. His daughter picked it. She's in Arizona now. I'm supposed to be there on the 1st of May, Marvin said. Del looked at him for a long moment. Sir, why would you be there on the 1st of May? And Marvin Ketchum, who had not told a whole true thing to another human being since 1979, told this one to a stranger in a thrift store, because he was 69 years old and out of gas. They drove to Marion on Thursday in Del's van. Homer Ingersoll was in a wheelchair by a window in a room that smelled like disinfectant and old radiator. He was small, the way tall men get small. On the wall above his bed, in a black frame that Del had bought him, was a hand-drawn navigational chart of a rectangle of open ocean, 840 nautical miles on the long side, with 14 date-stamped track lines drawn across it in 4 colors of pen. Uncle Homer, Del said. I brought somebody. The old man looked up. He had cataract surgery eyes, pale and enormous behind his glasses. He looked at Marvin's face for a while, without any recognition at all, and then his gaze dropped, because Del had put the jacket in Marvin's hands and made him carry it in, and Homer Ingersoll saw a sage-green MA1 with a burn on the left cuff. Turn the collar, Del said quietly. Marvin turned the collar back. There is a sound that very old men make that is not crying and is not laughing. Homer Ingersoll made it for about 15 seconds, with his hand over his mouth and his shoulders going, and then he took his hand away and he said, in the flat voice of a man giving a report, 211 hours. That's what we flew on you. 211 hours and 40 minutes. And then a colonel came in on the 15th day and said the search was suspended, and one of my guys threw a chair through a window, and they told us it was a fuel exhaustion event over water, and we were to consider the matter closed. He looked up at Marvin. You were 22 years old. 22. Marvin said. "Sit down, son," said the 81-year-old man, "and tell it. I've been waiting 47 years, and I have got nothing but time." So Marvin Ketchum told it. He had been a first lieutenant, 5 months out of upgrade, right seat on a C-130E out of a place he still did not name even now. And the aircraft commander was a captain named Howard Brubaker, who was 31 and had a wife in Sacramento and a way of saying, "your airplane," that made you feel 8 feet tall. The mission was not on any schedule. They flew in with the transponder off and the lights off, and they put down on a strip of PSP matting on an island whose name was not on the manifest, and they took on 40 men. Not soldiers, not most of them. Technicians, contractors, 4 interpreters, a doctor, 11 men who had worked for the Americans for 6 years and whose names were on a list somebody else had lost. The kind of 40 men that history does not write down, because writing them down would mean admitting somebody had left them there. They took ground fire on the climb out. Not much. Enough. A round came up through the flight deck floor at an angle, and it took Howard Brubaker through the left side below the ribs, and it went on and it took out the number 2 hydraulic system on its way to the overhead, and 40 seconds later they lost the utility system too, because the lines ran together through that same bulkhead, and somebody in 1953 had thought that was a fine idea. "No boost," Homer said. It was not a question. "No boost," Marvin agreed. "Manual reversion on the flight controls. It's in the book. The book says you can do it. The book is written by a man on the ground." Eugene Kavanaugh, the flight engineer, 26 years old, had gotten Brubaker out of the seat and into the companionway, and had worked on him for 11 minutes with a first aid kit and both hands, and had then come back up and put his hand on Marvin's shoulder and said, "He's gone, sir, and I need you to not look at him." Melvin Ridnar, the loadmaster, had gone back and stood in front of 40 terrified men in a dark cargo compartment for the next 2 hours, and had told them, in 3 languages he did not speak, using his hands, that the pilot had it. "You had it," Homer said. "I had a control yoke that took both arms and a boot on the pedals, and I had no flaps, no nose-wheel steering, no normal brakes, and 1 hydraulic accumulator with enough pressure in it for exactly 1 shot at the gear. Where'd you go?" Everywhere I could think of was 600 miles, or had people on it who'd have to write it down. Homer Ingersoll started to laugh, and it turned into a cough. "So you went to Tallow Key?" Marvin looked at him. "Son, I flew that box for 14 days. There's an old marine strip on Tallow Key from 1944. 4,000 feet of coral. It's not on the current charts. It's not on the current charts because it's not a runway anymore. It's a beach with delusions," Marvin said, and for the first time in 5 years, something in his face moved. He had found it on a 1961 chart in the nav bag, because Howard Brubaker had been the kind of pilot who kept old charts. He flew it for 3 hours and 10 minutes with Kavanaugh calling airspeed and a dead man wrapped in a cargo blanket 8 feet behind him. He dumped fuel down to a number that gave him no second chances, so that he would touch down slow enough for the coral. He blew the gear down with the accumulator on final at 400 feet, because if he had done it earlier and the mains had not locked, he would have had nothing left to try. He landed at 0447 local on the 12th of April, 1979, on 4,000 feet of broken coral, with no brakes worth the word, and he ran off the far end of it into sand at about 40 knots and stopped 90 feet short of the water. Nobody died on that airplane except Howard Brubaker, who died before it landed. 40 men walked out of the back. And then, Marvin said, nothing happened for 6 hours. And then a boat came. The rest he told faster, because it was the part that had cost him everything. A gray boat, and men who did not give names. The 40 taken off in 2 lifts. A demolition team who put charges in the wing roots and the cockpit on the 4th day, so that no one would ever find 66-0219 on a beach. A flight to Clark in the back of somebody else's airplane. And then a folding table in an empty hangar bay, and a man in a gray suit, and a document. They gave me a choice, Marvin said. That's what they'd tell you. There was a piece of paper, and I could sign it or not sign it. The paper said the flight had not occurred, that the personnel involved would be administratively reassigned, and that discussion of the operation with any person, including family, including future counsel, would constitute a violation of the espionage statutes. You were 22, Dell said. He had not spoken in half an hour. I was 22, and there were 40 men out there whose names were on a list. And the man in the gray suit explained to me, very patiently, that if the operation was ever confirmed to have occurred, every family those men had left behind would be inside a foreign country's file the next week. Marvin shrugged with one shoulder. So I signed it, and they separated me in August with a general discharge for an unrelated administrative reason, and they put my file in a box, and the box went where those boxes go, and I went home to Ohio and got a job. Homer Ingersoll wheeled himself forward until his knees touched Marvin's knees. Say the call sign, he said. Tallow 6. The old man closed his eyes. Tallow 6. Rescue 22. Radio check, he said, to a room in a nursing home in Marion, Ohio, 47 years late. Tallow 6. Rescue 22. Tallow 6. Any station. Any station. Rescue 22, Marvin said. His voice came apart in the middle of it. Tallow 6. Loud and clear. Homer Ingersoll put both hands over his face and cried like a boy, and Dell Ingersoll went out into the hall and stood with his forehead against the wall, and Marvin Ketchum sat in a plastic chair holding an old man's wrist and understood, finally, that he had spent 47 years being told he was carrying a secret when in fact he had been carrying 40 men, and they had been getting heavier the whole time. Dell Ingersoll made his phone calls that night. He had the number of a chief he had served under. That chief had the number of a colonel. That colonel had, by Friday afternoon, put the tail number 660219 into a system that had not been asked about it in 11 years, and by Saturday morning, a lieutenant colonel named Maureen Northrop, who worked at the Air Force Historical Research Agency at Maxwell and whose entire professional life was made of exactly this, had a hit. She called Dell on Sunday. She said 4 sentences, and then she said, "Mr. Ingersoll, I need you to not repeat any of this, and I need to be on a plane." She landed in Columbus on Tuesday. She was 52, small, with the flat, unimpressed manner of a woman who has spent 20 years telling generals that their favorite story is wrong. She met Marvin in the back of Second Wind Thrift, on 2 folding chairs, with a store brand recorder on a box between them, and she said, "Sir, before we begin, are you Tallow 6? And Marvin, who had said no to that question in one form or another for 47 years, said, "Yes, ma'am." What Maureen Northrop laid out over the next 3 weeks, in pieces, as things unlocked, was worse and stranger than anything Marvin had imagined in a room above a laundromat. The operation had been declassified, not recently, in 2011, 15 years ago. Somebody at a desk in Washington had signed a routine bulk declassification of a category of late 1970s contingency extractions, and 660219 had gone with it, and the file had moved from one shelf to another shelf, and precisely nobody had been assigned to go find the 22-year-old who had signed the paper. "That happens more than the Air Force likes to say out loud," Northrop told him. "The seal comes off, and there's no one whose job it is to knock on the door." There was more. There was a recommendation in the file, dated the 9th of May, 1979, submitted by a colonel who had died in 1994, for the Air Force Cross. It had been endorsed at 2 levels. It had never been acted on, because acting on it would have required the flight to have happened. There was a separation record with an administrative code that had been entered incorrectly in 1980 by a clerk who was working from a hand-annotated card, and that error, propagated through 2 system migrations in 1994 and 2004, was the exact reason that a search of the National Personnel Records Center under the name Ketchum, Marvin K., returned the string that had destroyed his life, no record found, and there was a query log. Every records request against a restricted or flagged file leaves a stub. Maureen Northrop pulled the stubs for 660219 and for Ketchum, Marvin K., and there were 4 of them in 47 years. 1 in 1983, 1 in 2011, the declassification itself, and 2 more. 16th of February, 5 years ago, she said, reading off her laptop in the back room of a thrift store. A commercial records retrieval service in Alexandria, Virginia. Standard third-party genealogical pull. That's 12 days before your wife's attorney submitted his request to St. Louis. Marvin looked at her, and a second pull, 11 days after that. Same service, same client account. She turned the laptop around. "Sir, The account is billed to a company called Legacy Continuity Partners. It's a subsidiary. The parent is Bellwether Legacy Group. The room got very quiet. Out front, the bell on the door went, and Dell told somebody the shoes were half off through Sunday. "Colonel," Marvin said slowly, "what would a nursing home company want with my service record?" "That was my question," said Maureen Northrup. "So I asked a friend at the VA Office of Inspector General. She'd like to meet you." Special Agent Valerie Yarborough of the Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General was 46 years old and had been building a case against Bellwether Legacy Group for 2.5 years without enough of anything to move on it. She met them in a conference room at a Hampton Inn off I-71 because a federal office was too loud a place to bring a man who was still, on paper, an incapacitated ward of the state of Ohio. With her came a woman named Isadora Vandergrift, an elder law attorney out of Cleveland who had taken the call at 9 at night and been in her car by 10. Yarborough put a binder on the table. It was 4 inches thick. "Mr. Ketchum," she said, "I want to tell you what I think happened to you, and I want you to tell me if it sounds insane." Rutherford Pennington was 58 and had started with 2 assisted living facilities his father-in-law had left him. He now controlled 29 facilities across 4 states, plus a home health agency, plus a veterans benefit advocacy arm, plus Legacy Continuity Partners, which described itself as a records and heritage service and which had a staff of 6 and a very expensive database subscription. The business, on paper, was senior care. The business, in fact, was capture. Pennington's people ran records. They ran obituaries, probate filings, VA award letters, county property transfers, and, this was the piece that had made Yarborough sit up 2 years ago, third-party military records retrieval, in bulk, on older men in 6 Ohio and Indiana counties. What they were hunting for was a specific profile, an older man with an income stream and a thin paper trail, a widower, a man with a pension and a gap in his history, a man who could not easily prove things. And then they went to the wife. "He calls it the family conversation," Yarborough said. "There's a script. It's in here. Somebody from Bellwether's community outreach makes contact with the spouse or the adult child. They're warm, they're free, they run a support group. And over about 9 months, they walk that person from, 'I'm worried about him,' to, 'He's not safe,' to, 'Here's an attorney who understands these situations,' to a conservatorship petition and a capacity evaluation from one of 3 doctors. Dr. Culpepper," Marvin said. "Norman Culpepper has signed 168 capacity evaluations in 11 years, and 164 of them found incapacity. And Bellwether Legacy Group has paid his practice $490,000 over the same period for what's described as clinical consulting." Yarborough turned a page. "The spouse gets the house and the cars and the accounts, and Bellwether gets the man, because the man is a monthly annuity that walks. Pension, Social Security, VA compensation if he's got it, and Medicaid on the back end after the estate's been stripped, which takes about 2 years, which is roughly the life expectancy in their locked wings." Isadora Vandergrift said, quietly, 214. 214 matching conservatorships across the network, Yarborough said. "I've had 140 of them mapped for 18 months. What I have not had is a single case where I can prove intent. Every piece of it is legal on its own. Records pull, legal. Support group, legal. Referral, legal. Doctor's opinion, protected. Judge signed off, done." She closed the binder. And then a lieutenant colonel calls me and says, "I have a query log showing Pennington's records shop pulled a sealed Air Force file on a man 12 days before that man's wife walked into court and put a forged no record found letter in front of a judge." Marvin's head came up. "Forged?" Maureen Northrup slid a single page across the table. It was a copy of a National Personnel Records Center response, dated the 2nd of August, 5 years ago. The real one. It had been retrieved from the NPRC's own outgoing correspondence archive, and it did not say, "No record found." It said, "Record located. Access restricted. Requester may petition, under 5 U.S.C. 552, with proof of standing." "Your wife's attorney received that letter," Northrup said. And then somebody made a second version. Marvin Ketchum sat in a hotel conference room off the interstate. and looked at a piece of paper for a very long time. Everyone in the room was braced for something. Yarborough had seen men throw chairs when they got to this part. Vandergrift had a legal pad ready. What Marvin said, when he finally spoke, was, "How much of this falls apart if I stand up right now and shout?" Yarborough blinked. "All of it. If Pennington knows we're looking, the legacy continuity servers get wiped. Culpepper retires to Florida with his files in a shredder truck, and your wife's cousin takes a plea on one count of tampering and does 11 months. And the other 213 men? Stay where they are." Marvin nodded slowly. He put his hands flat on the table, the way he had at the respondents' table 5 years earlier. "Then here's what I want to do," he said. "I want to sign the bellwether admission form." Isadora Vandergrift said, "Absolutely not." "Ma'am, with respect. For 5 years, every single one of those people has looked at me and seen a confused old man who makes up stories about airplanes." He tapped the table once. "That is the single most valuable thing I own. I would like to spend it." There was a silence. "Say the rest of it," Yarborough said. "They want me in that building on the 1st of May. Fine. Put me in that building. I'll go to their intake. I'll sign their forms. I'll sit in their day room and be exactly what they think I am, and I will write down every single thing that happens in that place, because I have spent 47 years being a man nobody writes down, and I am extremely good at it. You'd be wearing a wire in a licensed care facility as a legally incapacitated adult," Vandergrift said. "The evidentiary problems are, then fix them," said Marvin Ketchum. "That's your job. I've got a different one." He looked at Valerie Yarborough. "There's an 81-year-old man in that building who spent 2 weeks of his life looking for me over open water," he said. "I'm going to go look for him." Marvin Ketchum was admitted to Bellwether Meadows on the 1st of May at 10:15 in the morning. The intake coordinator was a pleasant young woman named Adeline, who called him on 19 times in 40 minutes and did not once look at his face. She had him sign 11 documents. 2 of them were the ones that mattered: an assignment of benefits, which routed his pension and his Social Security to Bellwether Meadows Operating LLC, and a residency agreement, whose 4th page contained a clause consenting to supportive supervision of movement within the community as clinically indicated. That last one was how a nursing home in Ohio locks a door on a man who can walk. They took his shoelaces because of a policy. They took his razor. They inventoried his belongings on a clipboard, and the inventory listed 1 duffel bag, 3 shirts, 1 coat, 1 shoebox of personal papers, and 1 photograph. They did not list the hearing aid because Marvin did not wear a hearing aid, and the beige plastic thing behind his right ear was not one. He was in that building for 49 days. He did not do anything dramatic. He did not confront anyone. He got up at 5:40 every morning, because that is when he had gotten up his entire adult life, and he sat in the day room with a paperback Western he never read a page of, and he watched. He watched the medication cart come around at 8 o'clock and again at 8:40, and he wrote down every time a resident got a dose from a cart that did not scan a wristband, and it was most of them. He watched a woman named Gloria in room 118 ask for her daughter's phone number 11 days in a row and be told, warmly, every time, that they would look into it, and he counted the days. He watched the census. Bellwether Meadows was licensed for 94 beds. It ran at 91. Of those 91, he counted, over 7 weeks, from the names on the doors, the meal tickets, the sign-in book at the front, and by simply talking to people, which nobody there ever did, 38 residents who had no visitor in 49 days, and of those 38, 29 had a laminated blue card in the door pocket instead of a white one. It took him 3 weeks to work out that blue meant conserved. Blue meant the facility, not the family. Had the paper. He watched the staffing. 2 aides on nights for 91 people, which is not care, it is triage. He watched a good aide named Marissa cry in the linen room in June because a man had been on the floor for 20 minutes and she had been at the other end of the building doing what one person can do. And every Thursday, a woman came. She came at 11, in a cream blazer, with a leather folder and a clipboard, and a manner so warm it was almost aggressive. She ran a family circle in the sunroom for the visiting relatives of new admissions. She held their hands. She said, "I know exactly what you're going through, because I went through it." And she said, "The hardest thing I ever did was accept that the man I married was gone." And she said, "You are not taking something from him. You are protecting him from himself." Her name badge said Marvin Ketchum, Regional Family Outreach Director, Bellwether Legacy Group. She had been on Rutherford Pennington's payroll for 5 years and 1 month. She had a salary of $91,000 and a bonus structure tied to what the internal documents called conversions. She walked past her husband in the day room every Thursday for 7 weeks and never recognized him, because he had lost 26 pounds in 5 years, and because he kept his chin down, and mostly because she had stopped seeing him a long time before that. On the 9th of June, a Selkirk Bend medic unit ran a transfer to Bellwether Meadows for a resident with a hip. Kristen Ketchum had been a paramedic for 11 years. She had been in a lot of buildings. She stood in the hallway of C Wing at 2 in the afternoon waiting on paperwork, and she looked down a corridor of open doors, and she did the thing that medics do without meaning to, which is a room-by-room read. She saw a man in 122 with a call light on that had been on long enough to have gone dim. She saw a lunch tray outside 126 with the film still on it. She saw a blue card in a door pocket and a white card in the next one, and she wondered idly what the difference was. She smelled what an understaffed building at 2 in the afternoon smells like, and she thought about her mother saying, on the phone, at Easter, "It's a lovely place, honey. It's honestly nicer than my house." And then she came around the corner into the day room, and her father was sitting by the window with a paperback Western upside down in his lap. Kristen Ketchum stopped walking. He looked up, and she watched him decide something. She would think about that half second for the rest of her life, the way his eyes moved to the ceiling corner and back. And then he smiled at her, the way you smile at a stranger's kid, and he said, pleasantly, "Afternoon." Nothing else. He looked back out the window. She got in the ambulance and drove 4 blocks and pulled over and sat with her hands on the wheel. Then she called her mother, and her mother said, "Sweetheart, he's exactly where he needs to be. And honestly, it's a weight off." And Kristen said, "Mom, how did you know he was there?" There was a pause on the phone that was about 1 second too long. That night, Kristen Ketchum, who had not spoken to her father in 3 years, drove to a thrift store on 3rd and Vine because she remembered a name off a receipt in a shoebox of unmailed letters her mother had thrown in the burn barrel, and she had pulled back out, and at 9:40 at night, she banged on the glass until a heavy man with reading glasses came out of the back. The petition hearing was on the 19th of June at 9 a.m., courtroom 3, Selkirk Bend. It was, on the docket, a routine matter. In re, the conservatorship of Marvin K. Ketchum. Motion by the conservator for a permanency order authorizing continued residential placement and for approval of the annual accounting. 15 minutes, allotted. Judge Gloria Satterfield, 5 years older, took the bench at 9:04. Millicent Ketchum wore navy. Quimby Litchfield had a new haircut. Dr. Norman Culpepper sat in the second row with an updated evaluation in his lap, 4 pages, based on a 20-minute conversation in a day room, concluding that the ward's condition had predictably progressed. And 2 rows behind them, in a charcoal overcoat, sat Rutherford Pennington, who had come personally because the Ketchum file was a nuisance and he liked to close nuisances. Marvin sat at the respondent's table with Isadora Vandergrift beside him. He was wearing the gray suit from his father's funeral. It hung on him. "Mr. Litchfield," the judge said, "go ahead." Quimby Litchfield went ahead. He went ahead for 22 minutes. He talked about decline, and about safety, and about the tragedy of a family confronting the inevitable. He submitted the accounting. He submitted Culpepper's update. And then, because he could not help himself, because it had worked so beautifully once, he reached back for it. "Your Honor, I'd note for the record that even in his current placement, Mr. Ketchum continues to present the same fixed narrative. Staff report he tells other residents he was an Air Force pilot. That he landed some aircraft. 40 men, I believe, is the number that—" "40," said Marvin Ketchum, out loud, for the first time in the proceeding. The judge looked at him. "Mr. Ketchum, your counsel will speak for you." "Yes, ma'am. I apologize." He folded his hands. "Anything further, Mr. Litchfield?" "No, Your Honor." "We'd ask the court to grant the petition." Judge Satterfield picked up her pen. Isadora Vandergrift stood up. "Your Honor, before the court rules, the respondent moves to reopen the underlying finding of incapacity under Rule 60b-3, fraud upon the court, and I would ask the court's indulgence for approximately 4 minutes. Ms. Vandergrift, this is a placement hearing. It is, Your Honor, and the placement is premised on a finding, and the finding is premised on a document, and the document is a forgery. The room changed temperature. She walked 1 page up to the clerk. Respondent's Exhibit A is the response of the National Personnel Records Center, dated August 2nd. Retrieved this month from the center's outgoing correspondence archive under a certification of authenticity from the director. It is the letter that was actually mailed to Mr. Litchfield's office 5 years ago. She turned. Petitioner's Exhibit 14, filed in this court by Mr. Litchfield, is not that letter. Quimby Litchfield said, Your Honor, Respondent's Exhibit B is a certified copy of the personnel record of Marvin Kenneth Ketchum, First Lieutenant, United States Air Force, declassified in 2011 and released in full on the 28th of May of this year. Your Honor, this is, and Your Honor, present in the gallery today under subpoena and available to the court, is Lieutenant Colonel Maureen Northrup of the Air Force Historical Research Agency and Brigadier General Ulysses Hathaway, Director of Air Force Personnel Programs. 2 people stood up in the 3rd row. Judge Gloria Satterfield set down her pen.
What happened over the next hour is now a thing that gets described in Selkirk Bend as either the morning in courtroom 3 or, by people who were not there, as an exaggeration.
Brigadier General Hathaway read the citation into the record. He read the whole thing, all 410 words of it, in the flat voice men use when they are afraid their voice will do something else. He read the tail number. He read the date. He read the phrase, with complete disregard for his own survival, and with a mechanical improvisation for which there exists no established procedure. He read the words, 41 souls, of whom 40 survived. Then he said, Your Honor, the Air Force Cross recommendation in this case was endorsed at 2 levels in May of 1979, and was never acted upon, because the operation could not be acknowledged. The Secretary approved it on the 3rd of June of this year. Lieutenant Ketchum's discharge has been corrected to honorable, his rank restored, and 47 years of pay and allowances are in process. And then the doors at the back of courtroom 3 opened. They came in one at a time, because Del Ingersoll was out in the hall in a folding chair with a list, and he had told them one at a time. Stanley Sarkeesian was 68, and had been 19 years old in the back of that airplane, and now owned a freight line with 400 trucks, and he walked to the rail and put down a coin. Willard Ogilvie, 71, retired from a paper mill in Wisconsin, put down a coin. Floyd Dunleavy, who had been an interpreter and who had not been an American citizen in 1979 and had been one since 1986, put down a coin and then put down a second one for his brother, who had died in 2004. They came in for 11 minutes. 31 living men out of 40, and 4 widows, and a woman from Fresno whose father had been the doctor, and every one of them set down a small brass coin on the rail of courtroom 3, stamped on one side with a tail number and on the other with a date, minted in 1981 by a machine shop in Toledo, and paid for by 40 men who had gotten a decision from a 22-year-old and had never once been able to say thank you. Homer Ingersoll came last, in a wheelchair, pushed by his nephew, and he did not have a coin, because he had not been on the airplane. He had a rolled-up chart of 840 nautical miles of open ocean, and he laid it on the rail flat, and he said, to a judge, out of turn, Ma'am, I looked for this man for 211 hours. I would like it on the record that the search is closed. Judge Gloria Satterfield had her hand over her mouth. In the second row, Dr. Norman Culpepper had gone the color of a boiled potato and was trying, unsuccessfully, to get his 4-page updated evaluation back into his briefcase without being seen doing it. Quimby Litchfield was staring at the table, and Millicent Ketchum turned all the way around in her seat, past the gallery, past 31 men who were all looking at her husband, and she looked at Rutherford Pennington. And Rutherford Pennington was not there. He had left at the word Alexandria. He got as far as the parking structure, where Special Agent Valerie Yarborough was leaning against his car, with 2 other agents and a warrant for the Legacy Continuity Partners servers, which had been executed in Alexandria 40 minutes earlier, at 9:15, while a lawyer was talking about a fixed narrative. The indictment was unsealed 8 days later, 41 counts: conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy against rights, and the one Valerie Yarborough had been chasing for 2.5 years, a substantive RICO count, because a records shop, plus a support group, plus a doctor, plus a compliant attorney, plus 29 buildings, is not a business, it is an enterprise. Norman Culpepper surrendered his medical license in September and pleaded in November. He is serving 8 years and will be 74 when he comes out. Quimby Litchfield flipped in under a week, because cousins are only family until there is a federal sentencing guideline involved, and his proffer, 40 pages of it, is the reason the government did not need Marvin Ketchum to testify at all. He was disbarred, and he did 31 months, and he is currently selling recreational vehicles in Kentucky. Judge Gloria Satterfield resigned from the bench in October after the state's Judicial Conduct Board found she had accepted $11,000 in faculty honoraria over 6 years from a continuing education foundation funded entirely by Bellwether Legacy Group. She was not charged with anything. She has said, publicly, twice, that she thinks about that first hearing every day, and I believe her, for whatever that is worth. Rutherford Pennington was convicted on 38 of 41 counts and sentenced to 22 years. And Millicent Ketchum, who had been offered a cooperation agreement in July, and who had spent 3 days telling 2 federal agents that she was a victim in all this too, pleaded guilty in February to conspiracy to commit wire fraud and to 1 count of tampering with records, and got 6 years. But none of that was the part that people in Selkirk Bend still talk about. Here is what happened to the money. In April of 1980, 40 men who had been carried off a beach on Tallow Key and put back into their lives with instructions to never discuss it, did the only thing they could think of. Stanley Sarkeesian, who was then 23 and driving a truck, went to a bank in Toledo with $18,400 in cash and money orders collected from 39 other men, some of it in currencies the teller had to look up, and opened an irrevocable trust with 1 instruction in it. The instruction said that the corpus was held for the pilot in command of aircraft 66-0219 on the 12th of April 1979, that it was to be invested conservatively, that it could not be distributed to anyone else for any reason, and that it would terminate only upon his identification or upon the death of the last surviving beneficiary of the flight, whichever came first. They called it the Tallow Key Fund. They added to it, every one of them, every year, whatever they had. Ogilvy sent $40 a year for 38 years. Dunleavy sent whatever he had left in December. Sarkeesian, once the trucks came, sent considerably more. On the day Marvin Ketchum's identity was certified by the Department of the Air Force, the Tallow Key Fund held $4,612,000. And that was the same summer that Bellwether Legacy Group's $61 million credit facility went into technical default, because you cannot pledge the receivables of 214 conserved residents as collateral when a federal indictment freezes the conservatorships. And the regional lender that held the note wanted it off the books before the quarter closed and was willing to sell it at 41 cents on the dollar to anyone who could close in 11 days. Sarkeesian Freight Systems could close in 11 days. So could a man who had just been handed 47 years of back pay, a trust from 1980, and the phone numbers of 31 men who owed him their entire lives and had spent 4 decades with no way on earth to pay it. They bought the paper. Then they foreclosed on it. 26 of the 29 buildings were transferred, in the following 18 months, into a nonprofit called the Brubaker Trust, named for a captain from Sacramento who died 8 feet behind Marvin Ketchum at 9,000 feet, and which is today run by a board that includes a retired loadmaster's nephew, a paramedic, and an elder law attorney from Cleveland. The 3 worst facilities were closed and their residents placed. The staffing ratio at the 26 is now 2-to-1 better than the state minimum, which is not charity. It is simply what the buildings can afford when nobody is extracting a margin out of the top of them. Bellwether Meadows in Marion was renovated in the spring and reopened under the name Homer House, over the strenuous objection of Homer Ingersoll, who said it was ridiculous, and who lived in it, in a corner room with better light, until he died at 84 with a framed chart on the wall. Now, the house on Fallowfield Road. Millicent Ketchum had been very proud of that house. She had also, in the 2nd year of her employment, signed a personal guarantee on a $2.1 million related party loan from Bellwether Legacy Group. because Rutherford Pennington required his regional directors to have skin in the game, and because it made her feel like a principal instead of an employee. The house had been pledged against it. She had signed that page herself, in the kitchen, with a glass of wine, and she had told her sister on the phone that it was the smartest thing she had ever done. That note was in the portfolio. Marvin Ketchum bought his own house back at a sheriff's sale in March for $860,000, of money that existed because 40 men had put cash in a jar in 1980. He drove out there on a Saturday. She was on the porch with 3 suitcases and a look on her face he had genuinely never seen before. Because in 31 years of marriage, Millicent Ketchum had never once been the person waiting on the porch. He did not gloat. Everybody who tells this story wants him to have gloated. He didn't. He got out of the truck. He put an envelope on the second step. He said, "There's $60 in there." She said, "Marvin, $60, he said, is what you left me, and it's what your lawyer's letter said my whole life was worth, and it turned out to be enough to start with. So I want you to have the same running start you gave me. I'm not being cruel. I've thought about it a long time, and I decided cruel would be beneath the men who paid for this house." Then he said the last thing he has ever said to her. "You spent 5 years telling a courtroom I was a man who made things up. You were the only person alive who could have gone and looked, and you didn't look, because you didn't want it to be true." He put his hand on the porch rail, briefly, the way you touch a machine you used to own. "That's not a crime, Millie. That's just who you turned out to be." Then he drove to a thrift store, and he took his jacket out of the glass case where Delbert Ingersoll had kept it for 11 months under a hand-lettered card that said, "Not for sale, not for any price," and he wore it home. The Air Force Cross was presented on the 12th of April, 47 years to the day, at Wright-Patterson, in a hangar, because Marvin asked for a hangar. Brigadier General Hathaway pinned it. Lieutenant Colonel Maureen Northrup read the citation and did not get all the way through it. 31 men stood in the front 2 rows, and Homer Ingersoll sat at the end of the first row in his chair with the chart across his knees. Kristen Ketchum sat next to her father until it was time for him to stand up. The 2 of them had done the hard part in February, in a Waffle House at 11 at night, and it had not been a movie. She had said the true thing, which was that she had wanted the report to be right, because if her father was sick then he was not a liar, and being the daughter of a sick man was easier than being the daughter of a man who had looked her in the eye for 30 years. And Marvin had said the true thing back, which took him 2 tries. "You didn't fail me," he said. "I let a piece of paper matter more than you. 47 years I told myself I was protecting people, and part of that was true, and part of it was that being nobody got comfortable. I could have found a way to tell you something. Some men did, I didn't." He turned his coffee cup around. "That's mine, Kristen. I'm not handing it to your mother. It's mine." That is the sentence she quotes now, when anyone asks. 3 weeks after the hangar, Stanley Sarkeesian, who owned 400 trucks and had spent 2 years of his profits on something profoundly impractical, called Marvin and said, "It's done. Come to Tucson." It was a C-130E. It had been sitting in the desert since 2006. It had a fresh paint job, and it had no unit markings, because there had never been any. And painted on the nose in 6-inch black letters was Tallow 6. Marvin Ketchum was 69 years old and had not flown anything in 47 years. So there was a company pilot in the right seat, and 8 months of getting current behind him, and a lot of paperwork nobody wants to hear about. There were 31 men in the cargo compartment, which is not a comfortable place to be, and every one of them had been offered a seat on Sarkeesian's Gulfstream instead, and every one of them had said no. The tower at Davis-Monthan had been briefed, because you do not spring this on a controller. Tallow 6, wind 240 at 7, runway 12, cleared for takeoff. Marvin Ketchum sat in the left seat with his hands on a control yoke and did not say anything for a second, and behind him 31 men were absolutely silent, and Homer Ingersoll, 82 years old, was strapped into the jump seat directly behind him with a headset on crooked. "Tallow 6, Marvin said, "cleared for takeoff," and they went. "Okay, Nathan again. I want to be careful with this one, because it would be easy to walk away from that story thinking the lesson is keep your receipts, and that is not the lesson. Here's what actually gets me about Marvin Ketchum. For 47 years, the thing that made him a hero was the exact same thing that made him a target. He was a man who could be relied on to stay quiet. That's an incredible quality, and predators love it. And the racket that came for him didn't pick him in spite of his character. It picked him because of it. Rutherford Pennington's people were not hunting for weak men. They were hunting for men with thin paper, widowers, quiet guys, men who never made a fuss and therefore had nobody in the habit of checking on them. Think about that for a second, because it means the profile of a perfect victim in this country is not gullible. It's self-contained. And the other thing, the one I can't shake, his wife had one job that mattered in 31 years, and it wasn't loyalty, and it wasn't even love. It was curiosity. She could have gone and looked. One request, one archive, one afternoon. She didn't, because the version where he was lying was more useful to her. And once a story becomes useful to somebody, they will defend it harder than the truth. That's not a marriage thing. That's a human thing. And you have watched somebody do it this month. So if you take anything from this, go look. About the people you've written off, about the story you've decided is settled, especially about the quiet old man in your family who has never once made a fuss, the one with the box in the closet nobody has opened. Somebody in your life has a tail number sewn into their collar. Go turn it over. I'm Nathan. Thanks for staying to the end.